Russia calls out efforts to train so-called Venezuelan refugees in sabotage. Trinidad and Tobago's former Public Administration Minister Marlene McDonald says she will be cleared of any wrongdoing in the corruption case against her. And 5 migrants are evacuated from the open arms migrant rescue vessel in the Mediterranean Sea. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. The spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, has said that Britain is building a military base in Guyana and that so-called Venezuelan refugees are arriving there to receive training in sabotage and espionage. The Foreign Affairs spokesperson also condemned a deliberately misleading mainstream media campaign to discredit the legitimate Venezuelan government of President Nicolas Maduro.
Several dozens of the so-called refugees from Venezuela have already arrived there. In fact, those are the people who have arrived to complete training for the recon and diversion groups in order to work in Venezuela and destabilize the situation and commit relevant actions from extremist to terrorist actions. At the same time, the media campaign also continues, aimed at discrediting the legal and legitimate authorities of Venezuela. The Western mass media are purposefully spreading information containing accusations.
Our correspondent Edson Sanchez provides us with the latest from Caracas.
Russia has denounced a plan to train supposed Venezuelan refugees at a British military base in Guyana. On Twitter, the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, said that it involves people who arrive to receive training and join groups for the purpose of sabotage and espionage. She also highlighted that the objective was to deploy these groups in Venezuela to provoke destabilization and violent acts. The Russian official also said that the British are just completing the construction of the military bases on one of the islands on the mouth of the Essequibo River, supposedly to combat arms and drug smuggling. This accusation by the Russian Foreign Ministry comes in addition to the denouncements which were made by President Nicolas Maduro on Wednesday. He detailed how a new conspiracy was in the making from Colombia, which would launch another attack against peace and democracy in Venezuela.
That was Edson Sanchez with that report. Now, staying in Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro says he has discovered another plot to assassinate him. He said the plan hatched by the right wing in Colombia involved bringing 32 mercenaries into Venezuela to kill him.
I have learned of a plan devised by Álvaro Uribe with the participation of the Colombian ambassador in Washington, Francisco Santos, a plan that they discussed with Lester Toledo, a fugitive from the Venezuelan justice, to bring 32 mercenaries into Venezuela to try to assassinate me and other leaders of the revolution. They discussed the plan in the bunker where Uribe lives.
The United States government says its extended financial blockade against Venezuela does not apply to food and medicine. But as our correspondent in Caracas has been finding out, that is not the case. The subsidized food delivery program known as CLAP is already being squeezed.
This is where they store food that the Venezuelan government delivers at a reduced price to people's homes. It's one of the programs said to suffer from the White House's latest sanctions. The local food committees known as CLAP supply boxes of basic foodstuffs direct to 6 million Venezuelan families at a price of less than $0.50. The system was set up in 2016 to combat the shortages caused by smuggling and speculation.
The box costs 6,000 bolivars and contains rice, pasta, sugar and milk, sometimes tuna, tomato sauce and mayonnaise too. We get one every 2 weeks.
Although Trump's executive order says the sale of medicine and food are not affected, experience shows that they are indeed affected as collateral damage. The case of a ship carrying 25,000 tons of soya to Venezuela, stopped in the Panama Canal, is one example.
If they boycott the CLAP, we will have to be creative. Otherwise, we will go hungry, because these clap boxes are cheap. If we go out to buy a bag of rice, it costs 4 times that, and we can't afford it. So we need this to avoid hunger and anxiety.
The opposition claims this is a mechanism to control the population, as did Michelle Bachelet in her UN report. But for these communities, it is a way of coming together and supporting each other.
First, we have to carry out a census, so we know exactly how many families we are. Then, the dates are set for the purchase and the delivery. There is a timetable that we stick to rigorously. Every week, I meet with the other members of the club. Each of them represents an organization.
This year, U.S. sanctions have hit 10 of the 12 ships bringing food to Venezuela. The government has condemned this as economic terrorism, and the people took to the streets to defend the system of social security. That say that the United States is trying to engineer a social crisis.
They want to undermine us psychologically and emotionally, force us to hate our president. But we learned the lesson from President Chavez, and that's what we are putting into practice now.
They reject the use of food as a weapon of war. In the face of uncertainty, they organize, and in the face of anxiety, they resist.
Shifting gears now, delegates from 27 nations have begun arriving in Trinidad and Tobago for the 8th Assembly of Caribbean People. The 5-day summit launches on Thursday under the theme Confronting the Imperialist Agenda while Strengthening the Resistance and Unity of Caribbean People. Speaking during an interview with TV6's Morning Edition program in Trinidad, the ACP's local organizing committee member Akinde Rudder says these discussions are very much needed.
We as Caribbean people need to have a conversation. There's a number of things that are happening, whether it be climate change, migration, integration, unity, a number of things that's happening among us Caribbean people. We need to have this conversation, and it includes everybody.
Now, it's 1 year since Mario Abdo Benitez won the presidency in Paraguay. However, his tenure has been marred by a political crisis and constant protests which are demanding his resignation and a political trial. Our correspondent Osvaldo Zayas has more from Asunción.
According to official data, unemployment increased from 5.2% to 7%, and people not making ends meet reached 22% of Paraguay's workforce. For the Workers' Union, this is another example of the government's failure to tackle these issues.
This government in its first year has not given minimum answers to workers on the issues they've raised. They've finished the first year on the edge of an abyss, facing political trial, weakened, beaten up, and with an inefficient people.
The current political situation keeps Mario Abdo Benitez under constant threat of a political trial. He worsened the situation in Paraguay 1 year into his government, and for sociologist Jose Carlos Rodriguez, it adds to a stagnant economy.
The first thing is that we are not in a crisis, but the economic dynamic has been falling in several areas, including exports, employment, production capacity. We are in a slow period.
This anniversary coincides with a series of protests across the country demanding the resignation of President Mario Abdo Benitez and his Vice President Hugo Velasquez. Social movements say this is because the president came close to handing over the country's sovereignty by attempting to sell the extra volume of energy produced by the Itaipu hydroelectric plant to Brazil.
This government serves foreign interests. It's a government that is not sensible to the interests of the people, that gives away our resources in favor of a local and violent oligarchy. So the popular demand is that they must resign.
Social and political organizations announced they will continue to mobilize until Abdo Benitez resigns or he's ousted by a political trial. Meanwhile, the president and the conservative Colorado Party are seeking to gather votes in Congress to remain in power for the next 4 years of his mandate.
Still to come, protesters condemn Argentina's economic woes. Don't go away. Welcome back. Trinidad and Tobago's disgraced former Public Administration Minister Marlene McDonald says she will be cleared of any wrongdoing in the corruption case against her partner and 3 contractors. McDonald made the comment as she left the Sinclair Medical Hospital. She's charged with conspiracy to defraud the government and money laundering and was granted $2 million bail. As a result of her arrest, she was fired from her ministerial post, as well as removed as deputy political leader of the ruling People's National Movement.
Don't worry, I'll be vindicated.
Guyana's High Court has ruled that the country's Election Commission's house-to-house registration is neither illegal nor unconstitutional. The acting Chief Justice handed down her ruling on Wednesday. Attorney Christopher Ram had sought to stop the registration exercise, claiming that it was not in the spirit of the Constitution, as no fixed date for elections has been set.
What is very important is that the house is not unconstitutional. No date was ever fixed by the CCJ, and she wouldn't fix the date either. Nor no elections are to be held in 3 months, as they had contended. And generally, there was nothing that was asked for by the applicant that was successful.
Social movements in Argentina took to the streets in Buenos Aires to demand that the government take immediate action against the country's economic crisis. The protests were called by left-wing political parties and other movements fighting against the neoliberal administration of current President Mauricio Macri. The demonstrators reject the rapidly devaluing peso and the rise in the prices of basic goods. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Sabrina Roth, has more.
Social organizations have held a protest against cuts. They're marching to the Plaza Cinco de Mayo with empty pots and pans, partly because food is to be delivered by the Department of Development, including milk and sugar. While on the other hand, however, they're protesting against the current economic environment in Argentina. The value of the Argentine peso dropped drastically this week, while President Mauricio Macri continues with his electoral campaign. He's met with his cabinet and made a call for them to recover votes. Minister for Security Patricia Bullrich, together with Alejandro Finocchiaro, held a news conference after the meeting to confirm that it was about the electoral campaign and not the grave economic crisis. Yesterday, Mauricio Macri announced a number of measures, but one of them, freezing fuel prices, has already been put on hold. He now says that they're going to negotiate on a company-by-company basis. What is certain is that Macri's measures are going to have little or no effect on the Argentine economy, while basic necessities become more and more difficult to afford.
That was Sabrina Roth with that report. Earlier, we were joined by Argentine political analyst Atilio Boron, who said it will be extremely difficult for the country to stabilize due to the negative effects of Macri's neoliberal policies.
The major disaster made by the neoliberal policies of Mauricio Macri are doomed to make enormous damage in the social fabric of Argentine society, and of course a major damage in the economic system, in which you have hundreds of small and medium enterprises, pymes, as we call here in Argentina, going bankrupt, and also big corporations like Honda leaving the country because there is no way to stabilize the prices of the major elements necessary for the production of automobiles. So we are in a very, very difficult situation.
Meanwhile, Boron said if presidential candidate Alberto Fernandez wins the election, he will have no choice but to treat with issues relating to Argentina's foreign debt with the IMF.
Donald Trump played a very, very strong role in Argentina, and he failed. So I think that they will be very, very careful now in the future dealing with Mr. Fernandez. Mr. Fernandez will have to deal with the IMF, there is no question on that, but first of all, there will be an examination of the foreign debt, because there is a strong indication that most of the foreign debt contracted by the Argentine government was used to finance the capital flight of the friend of Mr. Macri, what usually in America is called crony capitalism, which in Argentina was a rampant example during all these years.
The retrial of Evelyn Hernandez has begun in El Salvador with a chance that her 30-year sentence will be overturned. Hernandez was convicted of homicide after a stillbirth and served 3 years in jail. She had been raped and said that she was unaware of her pregnancy when she delivered a stillborn in 2016. The termination of a pregnancy is a crime in El Salvador, and according to the Citizen Group for the Decriminalization of Abortion, 147 women were sentenced to up to 40 years in jail for terminating a pregnancy between 2000 and 2014.
I have always told you that I'm innocent. My goals are to keep studying, and I only ask the prosecution to think things through, because I'm really innocent. Also, to the judge, I know that he will do justice. God willing, all will end well. I'm innocent.
In the second report in our series, Minas Gerais, Mining Conflicts in Brazil, our correspondents show what life is like for people in the city of Mariana. 4 years after the collapse of a mining dam, they found that reconstruction work has been painfully slow.
The ruins of a community destroyed by mud conserve the memory of that day in November 2015, when one of the dams belonging to a mining consortium of Samarco, Valley and BHP Billiton collapsed. 50 million cubic meters of mining waste poured into the Doce River and poisoned 43 towns. They called it the worst environmental damage in Brazilian history. 19 people were killed. Here in the Paracatu neighborhood of Mariana, the community remembers what it was like here before.
Life here was good. We had parties, we had fun. We were friends with all the neighbors. Now there is only sadness.
4 years later, no houses have been handed over to those affected. They've only just started putting in the infrastructure for resettling this community. In all of the cities that were drowned in mud, people are still struggling to get compensation. Others, like small-scale fishermen and miners, are struggling even to be recognized as victims. And nobody has been punished for the collapse of the dam.
The river provided us with everything, but now everything has changed because of this crime. We can't swim, we can't fish, and we can't work on the river, so we can't do anything. We lost our lifeline and now we are abandoned.
The 3 companies responsible for the disaster set up the Renewal Foundation to rebuild what they had destroyed. But the victims say the foundation has done little to repair the damage.
A sense of injustice still exists because while people have returned to their everyday life, it is not completely normal. They want to be compensated, people want the company to pay for what it did, but that hasn't happened.
The restoration of what was destroyed when the Fundão Dam collapsed in November 2015 is very slow. The victims continue to fight for justice and compensation. But how long must they wait for the mining companies Samarco, Valley and BHP Billiton to answer for the crimes they committed against the environment and the Brazilian people?
André Vieira, Sebastião Soto, Telesur, Brasil.
Still to come, Pakistan reports a firefight on its de facto border with India. Stay with us. Welcome back. 5 migrants on board the Open Arms migrant rescue vessel have been evacuated to the Italian island of Lampedusa for medical reasons. The ship has been at sea for 15 days, and despite a Supreme Court order allowing it to enter Italian waters, authorities are still denying the rest of the migrants permission to disembark. The NGO continues to call for access to safe European ports as the situation on board deteriorates. The leader of the opposition Labour Party in Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, has presented his clearest plan so far to prevent the UK leaving the European Union without a deal. In a letter to other opposition parties and dissident Conservative MPs, Corbyn said he would present a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the earliest opportunity. He called on the other parties to then install him as caretaker Prime Minister for a limited period while fresh elections were held. Analysts say the move is likely to be supported by the Scottish Nationalist Party, the Welsh Nationalists of Plaid Cymru, and the Greens. The Gibraltar Supreme Court has ordered the release of the Iranian oil tanker Grace 1 after it was seized by British forces last month. The aggressive move caused a standoff between the UK and Iran and worsened tensions. The United States made a last-minute request to the authorities to stop the release of the Iranian vessel. Iran criticized the seizure as illegal and condemned the operation as piracy. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has defended his decision to strip Indian-administered Kashmir of its special status, saying this will restore the region to its past glory. There have been widespread protests against the Modi government's scrapping of Article 370 of the Constitution, a provision that grants special status and allows the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir to make its own laws. Modi, however, defended his government's decision when he delivered an Independence Day speech in the capital, New Delhi.
The job that was not done in the last 70 years after the new government was formed was the work of removing Article 370, and Article 35A was done within 70 days. It was passed by both the houses of India, Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, with a two-thirds majority.
Now, Pakistan has claimed that 3 of its soldiers were killed in a cross-border shootout in the disputed region of Kashmir. But India has denied Pakistan's additional claim that 5 Indian troops also died in that gunfire exchange. Shifting gears now, 1 person was killed when a missile struck the only functioning airport in the Libyan capital, Tripoli. The missile targeting Mitiga Airport killed a guard and wounded several security agents. Operations were immediately suspended and all flights diverted to Misrata, 200 kilometers east of Tripoli. The airport has been repeatedly targeted since Eastern forces loyal to General Khalifa Haftar launched an offensive to wrestle control of the capital from the International Government of National Accord. The Democratic Republic of Congo officials have expressed confidence in the new Ebola treating drugs. The Director General of the National Institute of Biomedical Research, Jean-Jacques Mayumbe, said they have found the solution to the Ebola virus. They have also developed an antibody which can be administered to the sick. Doctors in Congo recently confirmed that 2 Ebola patients who were treated with new anti-Ebola drugs in Goma have been completely cured.
We believe that with these new strategies, we will control the epidemic in 3 to 4 months in view of the fact that controlling the epidemic does not rely solely on having curative products, but relies on a number of pillars that must work together to reach effective control of the epidemic.
Sudan's protest leaders have resolved to nominate prominent economist and former head of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Abdallah Hamdok, as the first Prime Minister of the country's 3-year transitional government. The protest leaders and the military council signed a power-sharing accord on July 17th ahead of a landmark deal, paving the way for civilian rule that is meant to be signed on Saturday. That brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you so much for watching.